Alrighty, lads, we're back. So the Maormer, the Snake Elves, also known as the Sea Elves, are a unique and obscure piece of lore. You see, until the video game Elder Scrolls Online, we never actually saw one. All we knew was what was in the books, like the brief history of the Empire. From here, we get a pretty good picture of the Sea Elves. But then Elder Scrolls Online comes out, and we get even more juicy details, as there are books scattered along with some good quests that deal with strictly the Maormer. In fact, most Elder Scrolls fans had zero idea the Maormer even existed until Elder Scrolls Online came out. Again, most people don't read the books and the games, so they don't understand crazy things like the time that Cyrodiil was owned by snake people. So let's talk about history. When the world was made and the elves lost their immortality, many of the elves started changing to their climates. Here we see that some groups, like the Chimer, moved to Morrowind, a land full of volcanoes, thereby gaining black skin with fire resistance and boasts a destruction magic capable of conjuring the very flames of their homelands at their fingertips. So you may ask, so what does this have to do with the Maormer history? Well, the current theory is that the Maormer were a group of rebellious high elf nobles who attempted to place their king, King Orgnum, onto the throne of the entire continent. Reasons have been obscured as history has turned into legend, yet one thing is consistent: King Orgnum was insanely wealthy, and attempted to use such of his wealth as a bridge to get to the throne. How he gained his wealth was, well, simple. He possessed a magical chest that, when opened, would spew out untold amounts of gold. To this day, this chest can still be found at random places, but it's always stated to fade away from existence once it has given the person a certain amount of gold. This gold amount changes per person, oddly enough. Through civil war, King Orgnum failed, and so did his brethren. Upon his failure, they were utterly banished from the lands of Somerset Isle, forced into exile on this damn near inhospitable island called Pyandonia, an island racked with mist storms. A mist storm is when the fog is so thick that you cannot tell what time of day it was, for it blocked out the darkness of the night and the light of the day. Easily, many vessels would be run aground and suffer the loss of all life on board, trying to penetrate this mist. But through unknown means, the Maormer survived. Many years had passed and relative peace sprung back upon the lands. But for the exiles waited and brewed in their miserable mist-covered island. Here, King Orgnum, through further unknown means, had achieved immortality, rising to the status of a living god among his own people. They began to worship him as the only rightful ruler of Aldmeris, the province of Somerset Isles. As all elves do, the Maormer started to change, not just culturally, but physically. Living on a jungle island riddled with serpents and sea snakes had started to take an effect. The very eyes of the Maormer would go pale, with barely visible irises laying underneath. Their skin would become pale as well, with some people sporting fish scales along their body. Even their tones started to change, where salt water is normally a death sentence if you drank it. But the Maormer, the salt water was now drinkable, as they could sip the water out of the sea. Many of their armors and markings and iconography started to bore serpents, and their color schemes changed into a dark and deep blue, like the waters around them. One of the most interesting features, though, I think, is one that is the most eye-catching. It's so eye-catching that even those who are ignorant of the magical arts find it alarming, is the discovery of snake and storm magic. Yeah, let that sink in. Magic pertaining to snakes and storms. Having lived on an island riddled with massive sea serpents and surrounded in a perpetual storm, the people here learned how to bind these elements to their will, able to call upon the eye of the hurricane or the fury of a sea worm to rip apart their foes' ships in a matter of seconds. In Elder Scrolls Online, we get a good start to this at the beginning of the High Elf playthrough, where we wake up on a beach surrounded by an entire destroyed fleet of the Aldmeri Dominion. The Maormer had struck, summoning their torrents of wind and gust, chanting and slating the ground in blood with sacrifices. They enacted powerful rituals to summon a monstrous hurricane able to engulf a nearby port, sending the entire High Elf fleet into the beach, destroying all the ships that happened to be there. Any men who survived were easily snuffed out by the sea serpents that would slither in the waters, some able to gulp a man in one bite. But the small ones were the real threat. Unassuming in their size, yet 10 times as deadly, these sea vipers were the product of snake mages. They would pursue targets, and in one small nick, your life was over. The powerful venom worked through your body in a matter of seconds. You stood no hope of surviving this. While their military and magical capabilities were of note, the real danger of the Maormer was their cunning. You see, the Maormer were defeated time and time again. Every invasion, every spell slung, every massacre they enacted, all ended in their defeats. But it's their perseverance that has led to many species to fear the Maormer, for they do not give up, and they never forget. Many times they've enacted clever schemes involving unfavorable treaties and targeted assassinations. Yet in their cunning wit, they always suffer the ill fates of being founded. The only thing I find most disturbing is how much failure they suffer, yet they seem to keep following their king, King Orgnum, who is stated to always lead his armies as they set ablaze once again to Somerset Isles. So now we talked about their history, let's talk a little bit about the magic that I talked about. You see, when they use snake magic, it's a number of things. One, it's controlling snakes, so they can summon a giant snake out of the ocean to come up and swallow an entire galleon whole. They could also summon little sea dogs. They're like half snake dogs, and they can come out and serve as their pets. But one of the more interesting ones, it was in one of the DLCs of Elder Scrolls Online, was snake magic can be used to alter the snake species. One of the fascinating things that we see is one of the sea snake priestesses is able to cast snake magic to change snake eggs into different species of snake eggs. So they come out as these lightning snakes, where they just come out as these massive brutes who can kill easily 3 guards in one bite. This is very interesting to me, the idea that they can just change it like that. Then again, Argonians are very much similar. There is, after all, an Argonian culture where their whole thing is stealing other Argonian eggs because they're incapable of laying eggs. And by putting those eggs next to their hist trees, it changes the egg into a different Argonian species. This is what the Maormer are doing. So it makes me wonder, could the Maormer alter Argonians if they wished? Argonians are reptilian, different than serpent for sure, but if they're able to cast this level of magic, this level of morphology, to change an entire egg, is it really too far of a leap to say that Maormer could steal a bunch of Argonian eggs and convert them into possibly the craziest, largest larva we've ever seen of serpents? Could it also be possible the Maormer could be the only species who could wipe out the Argonians? They just simply come over to every single hist tree. They don't tear it down. They just simply stand near the hist trees, and when the Argonians plant their eggs, they just morph all the eggs. Yeah, you gave birth. Yeah, you did this. but your species is gone because we wiped out the species that's inside the egg. That could be very dangerous. That could be a lot of doom for some species. One of the other interesting things is storm magic. Storm magic is where they would enact sacrifices. Now, sacrifices in Elder Scrolls work as sort of a way to boost power temporarily of a spell, so therefore the mage doesn't get so drained of their magic. But what Maormer would do is they would summon a massive storm Atronach, and this storm Atronach would be so grand that sometimes they would just have that be the hurricane, where it would just come around, blazing lightning, leaving a giant trail of scorched earth. Other times the Maormer do summon a literal hurricane. So there is more nuance to their capabilities with these two spells, these two amazing magical capabilities. Some of the sea serpents, after all, can shoot out venom, and then some of the Tempest guys can have thunder just drop from the sky on top of you. What's really interesting, though, is the Maormer culture regarding the King Orgnum. You see, King Orgnum identifies himself as another god entirely different. He is worshipped as a god, but he says he is God Satakal. Satakal is a very interesting god, and it makes me wonder if maybe the history is wrong. Maybe the theories behind the Maormer is actually incorrect. You see, Satakal is a very eye-catching name to call yourself. Satakal is not an elven god. Satakal is not even in the elven pantheon. But Satakal does exist in other people's religions. So who is Satakal? Satakal is the Red Guards. The Red Guards believe in Satakal, and Satakal is supposed to be the world serpent, where he eats his own tail, and he is literally the world. So how does a Red Guard religion end up in the Maormer's custody? How do the Maormer worship Satakal? Well, that's where I think this is all going to be theory territory, but I think the Maormer history is wrong. I don't think they actually come from Somerset Isles. I think they come from the Snake Elves. I think that's their home. Now, you may wonder, who are the Snake Elves? Well, the Snake Elves are the elves of Yakuta. Yakuta is the Shattered Continent. It's the continent where the Red Guards come from. Supposedly what happened is that the Red Guards, previously they went by a different name, the Yakutans, and the Snake Elves had an issue. They had war. Now, theoretically, there's a few theories as to what happened, but in theory what had happened was the tower that was there, that was made by the Snake Elves, was destroyed by these Red Guards, who enacted a crazy sword ritual where they somehow just sliced it down and destroyed the whole tower. In doing so, they blew up their own continent, because no one's ever done that before. Now, that's one theory. Another theory the Red Guards believe is that Satakal pulled the continent down to the ocean, and that Satakal ate the continents. Now, how do we go from Satakal being a Red Guard to all of a sudden being the Maormer? To all of a sudden King Orgnum identifies as the Satakal. He has no Red Guard allies. He has no Red Guard ties. So how did this happen? You see, what I think has happened is, I believe King Orgnum really is wealthy, and I do believe he is probably one of the Snake Elves. But I think what it was is that he does have a legitimate claim to the throne of Somerset Isles. He probably does have some sort of linked ancestry, and he figured that if I can't own the continent of Yakuta, then I will return home and own that continent. I will transfer my crown from here to there. And by returning home, he was greeted as a refugee, but then he was denied. And it is in this denial that he waged his war. After all, it would make sense. The Isles would go, what? You lost your continent and now you're trying to rule ours? You're not fit for this, obviously. And this would prompt war. Now what's interesting is that the Maormer don't share any other deities. They just share Satakal. And the serpent iconography that the Red Guards have is the exact same iconography of the Maormer. So maybe there is truth. Maybe there is something out there in Yakuta lands that really is this massive fuck-off serpent. Maybe there is something in there. Maybe King Orgnum had done a ritual binding himself to Satakal and thereby creating sort of like a Heart of Lorkhan in the Merworm, allowing him to be literally immortal as long as no one kills Satakal. This would be my theory, and this would be very fascinating if eventually we do see this become truth in Elder Scrolls. Now, the last time we ever see the Maormer is in the Third Era, where King of Somerset is being invaded and he calls upon the Imperial aid. You see the Empire, the Septim Empire, decides to help. This is where Emperor Antiochus comes in, and he, along with the Somerset King, they fight, and they're barely winning against King Orgnum. Barely. They barely push him back. And it's when they push him back that all of a sudden a massive hurricane comes in and sweeps away the Maormer fleet. We're talking utter decimation. Their fleet is gone. Now, there is a few things about this. Where did this come from? I thought the hurricanes were the Maormer's things. Where the fuck did this hurricane come from? Was it natural? No. It was made by the Sigic Order. And this would not be the first time the Sigic Order has intervened in Somerset affairs. If anything, it seems like the Sigic Order only cares about High Elf affairs. So, with that, we have talked about the Maormer. I hope you guys have enjoyed. I wish we would see more of them. I wish that there would be maybe a game later on in the future where we play in their areas, just as like a DLC, where all of a sudden the Maormer open up borders and say, listen, we haven't invaded since the Third Era, it's now the Fourth Era, possibly the Fifth Era, now that Alduin's dead. We're willing to trade with the rest of the world. We're willing to give up slavery because after all, we do kidnap a lot of people. Or maybe they do the opposite, where they say, we're opening up our territory only because we're about to own everybody. And you see them doing what I said earlier, getting rid of Argonians. They could theoretically wipe out that entire species by manipulating the hiss trees. And then you could do this whole thing where you're trying to uncover their magics and figure out a way to protect the hiss trees and like permanent rituals that stop them from being altered. This would be a problem for the Argonians, because the Argonians do change the hiss tree sometimes, and that's part of their culture. Like, one Argonian group will attack another Argonian group, and once they win, they will change that person's hiss tree into their species. So, who knows? Maybe it will cause a stagnant Argonia, where now they're just permanently stuck with the histories they're at. That could be a really cool game. Besides that, I've been talking a little too much. See you guys next time, and as always, I appreciate the love and support. Tell me what you guys think down below. Do you guys think I'm right? Do you guys think that there maybe is some truth, that they did come from the Sinistral Elves? Let me know down below. See you next time.